Hello, my name is Dr. Roderick L. Roll, and today I will be talking to you about basic chemistry. In this chapter, we will talk about atoms versus elements, both of which will be found on the periodic chart or the periodic table. Everything that has mass and takes up space is composed of matter. Matter would be those atoms and those elements. Matter can be solid, liquid, or gas. So the air that we breathe is composed of matter. An element is a unique substance that cannot be broken down by physical or chemical means. An element is made of smaller particles called atoms. We will talk about two types of elements, a diatomic atom and a polyatomic atom. In a diatomic atom, we have two atoms chemically linked together. An example would be oxygen, O2. An example of a polyatomic atom would be phosphorus, P4. These atoms are chemically linked together. These elements can be arranged into a table or a chart. This is called the periodic chart or the periodic table. In this table, you have 92 naturally occurring elements. Atoms are more or less identical building blocks from each element. So each element on the periodic chart is composed of atoms. It can be a diatomic atom or a polyatomic atom. One example is hydrogen. The hydrogen element has actually three isoforms or three variations. They are hydrogen, deuterium, and tritium. They are all hydrogen because they all have one proton. They are isoforms of one another because they have different numbers of neutrons. So deuterium has only one neutron and tritium has two neutrons, but all of them are actual isotopes of hydrogen or isoforms of hydrogen. This is another example of a variation, a isotope or a isoform. Carbon 12, carbon 13, and carbon 14. They all are carbon because they all have 6 protons. If it had an additional proton, it would not be carbon, it would be nitrogen. Now we will look at properties of elements. Each element has a unique physical and chemical property. We will first discuss examples of physical properties. Physical properties are those detected with our senses. The first one is thermal conductivity. This is when the element has the ability to conduct heat. An example of such an element would be the metals. A specific type would be iron. So iron has thermal conductivity properties because it can conduct heat. On your stove, if you have an old-fashioned stove, you know what the heating element of the stove is. It is made of iron. Once you turn the stove on, that spiraling iron is able to conduct heat. The second physical property that some elements have is malleability. Some of the metals are malleable. They are able to be bent. One example is aluminum. Aluminum is in the wires that run above your house. From one utility pole to the next utility pole, you have those black wires. Those black wires are insulated. Inside of the insulation is aluminum. The third physical property is ductility. Some elements can be drawn into a fine strand or a fine wire. An example is copper. So once the electricity comes into your house, it travels through the walls through copper wires. You also have copper in all of your electronic devices, the plugs that go with those. The fourth physical property is solubility. That is when the element is able to dissolve in water. Some examples are iodine, potassium, and lead. How this works is water is polar. This means water has a slightly positive charge and a slightly negative charge. The hydrogen that makes up H2O is delta positive or slightly positive. The oxygen is slightly negative. Whenever we have elements that form ions, such as a cation or an anion, those ions can dissolve, can be attracted to the delta negative and delta positive charges of water. The fifth physical property is density. Density is the measure of relative heaviness. The sixth physical property is based on these different states. These states are based on volume and shape. So some elements can be in the solid form, a liquid form, or a gaseous form. The next thing we will talk about is the chemical properties. Some elements have chemical properties. Chemical properties pertain to the way atoms interact with one another. Atoms rearrange electrons in their outermost shell. This is going to create a chemical bond. So if an atom is supposed to have 8 electrons in its outer shell and it has 6, it is hungry for 2 more electrons. If there is another atom close by that can give up 2 electrons, then those 2 atoms will interact in reference to their outermost shells. This will form a chemical property. So 2 types of bonds will be seen when atoms get together with other atoms in reference to their outermost shells. These 2 chemical bonds are ionic bonds and covalent bonds. In the ionic bond image, the atom on the left is going to give the electron to the atom on the right. It will not share, therefore we call it a ionic interaction. This will form a ionic bond. The image to the right is a covalent bond. This is when the atoms share their electrons in the outermost shell. The next thing we'll talk about is just the elements that relate to humans. So out of the 92 natural occurring elements, only 25 are very vital to our survival. Let's go into each of these. The 25 elements that are vital for humans can be separated into three major categories. The first one is called major elements. The second is lesser elements. And the third is trace elements. So the first category is major elements. It makes up 96% of the weight of the human body. It is composed of 4 elements. I commonly call it cone. C for carbon, O for oxygen, H for hydrogen, and N for nitrogen. Oxygen makes up the majority of the major elements. It makes up 65% of the weight, oxygen. So in order to lose weight, you can't just stop bringing in oxygen by holding your nose. This isn't the oxygen we're talking about. This oxygen is chemically linked to macromolecules such as fats and carbohydrates. So in order to remove oxygen, you have to remove the macromolecules. So you have to stop consuming carbohydrates, or you have to stop consuming lipids. The next category is the trace elements. 12 elements make up the trace elements. They make up 0.01% of the body weight. One of these trace elements that we will discuss is iron. So iron is required in minute amounts. Iron is found as part of enzymes. One particular enzyme is embedded in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So we all know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It is there to generate ATP, which is energy. If iron is not present, the enzyme that is embedded in the inner membrane will not function appropriately. Therefore, electrons will not move down the electron transport chain, which is embedded in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. If you do not move the electrons, you cannot generate ATP. If you don't generate ATP, you don't have energy. So therefore, it is important for you to consume iron, whether it be in a pill form or whether it be in foods. You must consume iron. This is a trace element. Another trace element is fluoride. Fluoride is a form of the element fluorine. Fluorine is naturally found in drinking water. The difference between fluorine and fluoride, look at the image. Fluoride has received an extra electron in its outermost shell. That is the only difference. Remember, in order to make an element a different element, you must add proton number. Fluoride is added to dental products to benefit tooth remineralization, and it inhibits bacteria that typically colonize the teeth and gums. So fluoride is added to dental products to benefit our oral health. Attached to this slide is where I received this information from the CDC and the NCBI website. Another trace element is iodine. Iodine is needed for normal thyroid development. If you do not consume enough iodine, you can develop a goiter. This is a abnormal growth of the thyroid gland, which is located in the neck region. Where can I get iodine? Salt can be iodinized. So iodine can be added to salt. If you don't like to consume salt, you can eat shellfish. Either one will give you your dietary recommended amount of iodine. The next category is lesser elements. It makes up 3.7% of the body weight. Some of these are calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium. The first of the lesser elements we will discuss is calcium. Calcium is involved in muscle contraction. To the far right in the bottom, I have an image of a muscle fiber. This muscle fiber has what is called a sarcoplasmic reticulum. This is where the calcium is stored. When the muscle contracts, filaments slide across one another. Calcium is instrumental in the myosin head binding to the actin filament. If calcium is not there, the myosin head will not bind, and this sliding filament theory will not occur. So basically, you will not be able to contract your muscle if calcium is not there. So calcium is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Once this calcium is depleted from this sac-like structure, it is then tapped from the bloodstream, and then once that runs out, it is tapped from the bone. Once calcium starts to be removed from the bone, you can develop a disease called osteoporosis. So consuming the right amount of calcium is very vital. This is why the federal government recommends for children to consume milk. Milk will have 9 essential nutrients that you need, and one of them is calcium. The second lesser element is phosphorus. Phosphorus is used in the formation of the energy molecule. The energy molecule is called adenosine triphosphate. So if you don't consume the right amount of phosphorus, you cannot produce the energy that you need. Number 3 and 4 can be found in Gatorade or electrolytes. So potassium helps with membrane excitability, and sodium helps with membrane excitability. Chlorine also is involved in this process also. So if you look at our image, we have the phospholipid bilayer of a cell membrane. On the outside of the membrane, we have some of those ions. So these ions will build up, and because we have more positive ions outside than inside, the outside of the membrane will be positive in reference to the inside of the membrane. This is very vital in reference to moving the electrical impulse, which is called propagation of an action potential. So when I stimulate my muscle to contract, the signal comes from the central nervous system, the brain, and runs down the spinal cord until it reaches the muscle. When we say that, what we're meaning is a electrical impulse will travel down the nerve. The electrical impulse is nothing more than changing the polarity of this membrane. So at the beginning of this nerve, you see that we have a lot of positive ions outside. To the right of that, a lot of the positive ions go inside. Therefore, the outside becomes negative and the inside becomes positive. This is generating the electrical impulse. This image also shows what is happening. From the first image to the middle image to the third image, every time we open the sodium channel and allow sodium to come in, we change the polarity of the membrane. The outside becomes negative. Then adjacent to that section, the same thing occurs. Then adjacent to that section, the same thing occurs. This is going to push our electrical impulse all the way down the nerve. The sixth lesser element is magnesium. Magnesium is a cofactor just like iron was in reference to the mitochondria. So other enzymes inside of the cell require other types of cofactors. So magnesium is like the key that starts the engine for the enzyme. If the key is not present, the enzyme will not work. So you can be consuming all of the nutrients that are required to gain weight, but you forgot to consume your cofactor. Therefore, you will be malnourished because those enzymes will not be able to catabolize the nutrients that you consumed. The seventh lesser element is sulfur. Sulfur is part of cysteine. Cysteine is one of the 20 amino acids. In this long red polypeptide, we have thousands of amino acids. Wherever there are cysteines, on the ends of the cysteine, you have a sulfur group. If two cysteines get close enough together, the two sulfur groups can interact and form a bond. This bond is called a disulfide bridge. This will make a fold in this long linear polypeptide. Other areas can join together by hydrogen bonds, ionic bonds, hydrophobic interactions, and disulfide bridges. So if you were to destroy a protein, all you would have to do is break some of these bonds and the protein will unravel. A prime example of this would be denaturing a protein by increasing heat. By increasing temperature, by adding heat to the environment, such as a fever, you will break the hydrogen bonds that hold this polypeptide together. Therefore, this globular protein or this fibrous protein will unravel. This will render the protein inactive. Now we're going to move to another topic. We're going to take a closer look at the structure of an atom. We have a nuclear core, and inside of the nuclear core you have your positively charged protons and your neutrons. Your neutrons are neutral. These both are called subatomic particles. Outside of the nucleus, floating in the electron clouds, are electrons. They're subatomic particles that are negatively charged. This is an atom. This is how you would draw the atom in class. You would draw a nuclear core with your protons in the middle and your neutrons in the middle. And then outside of that, you'll draw your first shell that could contain 2 electrons. And then you draw your second shell. So an atom has a nucleus, and outside of that will be the electron cloud. In the nucleus, the neutron has no charge, but the neutron has mass. So if we were to weigh the neutrons, it would weigh 1 atomic mass unit, or 1 AMU. Now in lab, you would have used an electronic balance. So therefore you should know that the unit of mass, or the unit of weight, in dealing with the metric system is grams. So therefore here's the conversion so you can better understand how much the neutron weighs. 1 AMU is equivalent to 1.66 times 10 to the negative 24th gram. A proton has the same mass as a neutron, 1 AMU, but the difference in this subatomic particle is it is positively charged. The neutron was neutral. The electron is a little different. It has a negative charge, and it is 1/2000th of the mass of a proton. So therefore you'll see it written as 0 AMU. This slide shows the old planetary model versus the new orbital model. When I ask you to draw a planetary model, you would need to have a little bit of information. So on the periodic chart, every element is drawn as the symbol, the name. At the top of the box will be the atomic number, and at the bottom of the box will be the atomic mass. We'll need all this information when you're supposed to draw the planetary model of an element. Atomic number, which is at the top, is equal to the number of protons that will be in the atom. So for example, carbon, if I ask you how many protons would carbon have, you would just need to look at the atomic number, because AN, atomic number, is equal to the proton number. The protons and neutrons determine an element's mass number. The mass number equals the atomic mass. That is the bottom number. The atomic mass is the atom's total mass expressed in AMU. So again, when drawing the planetary model, if you have your atomic mass, or the mass number equals protons plus neutrons. You already know what the proton is, so it's easy to calculate this. For those of you that still need help, use this formula to figure it out. Now we're going to look at isotopes, or variations, or isoforms of these atoms. They can be a stable variation or a radioactive variation. Isotopes are different atomic forms of the same element. An example is carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14. P is equal, or it will not be carbon. Like I stated earlier, if the proton number was 7, it would be a different element. It would be nitrogen. So what is unique about C, 12, 13, and 14 is they all have the same proton number, but they don't have the same neutron number. All of these are isotopes. We call carbon C12 because it is the most abundant isoform found in nature. In nature, it represents 99% of the carbon found. Relative atomic mass equals the atomic weight. This is the average of all different isotopes in a given sample. The given sample in this image is the bone. So this is the relative atomic mass. Here is isotopes of hydrogen. We have hydrogen, deuterium, and tritium. This is what we spoke about earlier. The difference being their neutron number. Radioactive isotopes are atoms that undergo spontaneous decay. This decay is ejection of subatomic particles. This ejection is called radioactivity. Some of the radioactive particles are alpha particles, beta particles, and gamma rays. So here's an example of a radioactive isotope. This shows the decay, the ejection of radioactive particles. So the nucleus decays, giving off particles and energy. The example is radioactive carbon becoming nitrogen. This radioactivity is utilized in research and medicine. For example, cobalt-60 is used to treat and prevent cancer. Another example is iodine-131. This locates brain tumors, monitors cardiac, liver, and thyroid activity. So as I stated, radioactivity can be used in research and in medicine. Here's an example of how radiation can be used in medicine. The PET scan. The PET scan stands for positron emission tomography. It is used to treat cancer and heart disease. How this is used is you first have to administer the radiation. It can be administered intravenously through injecting directly into the vein. The patient can swallow a pill, or they can inhale gas. Once the radiation is inside, gamma rays will be given off. A gamma camera will capture the radiation that is being emitted. Another type of radiation that can be used in medicine is X-rays. X-rays create a 2D image from a three-dimensional structure. Now we will conclude with doing an activity. The first thing I would like for you to do is on a extra sheet of paper to write out these 4 elements and then answer the question: how many protons do the following elements have? This is the answer. You were supposed to look at the periodic chart and use the atomic weight. The atomic weight of each element is at the top. The atomic weight equals proton number. The second question is, how many neutrons do the following elements have? For this one, you use the bottom number. You take the top number minus the bottom number, and this will give you your value. This would be your neutrons. Question 3. How many electrons do the following elements have? This is just like the first problem. The atomic mass equals the protons, and protons equal electrons.